Modern relationships have reached a point that would sound like satire if people were not saying these things with complete sincerity. I regularly hear men describe dating conversations where they are told, without irony, that a real man should earn $500,000 a year just to cover what is framed as basic maintenance costs, $20,000 a month for lifestyle, appearance, and comfort in the same breath. Splitting a dinner bill is described as financial abuse, and a man who hesitates is labeled cheap, insecure, or dangerous. What once belonged in exaggerated comedy sketches has quietly become normalized expectations in everyday dating culture. Even more revealing are the systems now built around these beliefs. There are paid courses teaching women how to get men to pay rent without emotional commitment, programs that promise financial support without intimacy, and social media playbooks explaining how to extract resources while calling it empowerment. The language is polished, wrapped in self-worth rhetoric and knowing your value. But the mechanics underneath are transactional to the core. Relationships are no longer framed as two people building something together, but as a test men must pass financially before being considered human. What often surprises people is not that struggling men walk away, but that even highly successful men do. I work with men who have businesses, investments, and status, and many of them have reached the same conclusion quietly and independently: the deal no longer makes sense when expectations are disconnected from contribution. Affection becomes conditional, and respect turns into leverage. At that point, the question is no longer, can I afford her? But why would I volunteer for this arrangement? This is where the deeper shift happens. Millions of men are not bitter, angry, or broken. They are simply opting out. They look at the rules as they are currently written and decide that solitude is a better bargain than constant financial and emotional taxation. They are choosing peace over performance, stability over approval, and autonomy over a game that feels increasingly rigged. This is not a rejection of love itself, but a rejection of distorted expectations disguised as romance. From the outside, this withdrawal is often mocked or misunderstood. Men are told they are afraid of strong women, intimidated by standards, or emotionally immature. In reality, many of them have done the math carefully. They have watched friends, fathers, and brothers give everything and still be told it was not enough. They have seen relationships framed as reward systems rather than partnerships, and they are choosing to step away before the cost becomes irreversible. This opening reality sets the stage for a much larger conversation, because once men begin questioning dating expectations, they inevitably start questioning something even more foundational: the modern institution of marriage itself and the legal framework that surrounds it. That is where the real fear, calculation, and long-term consequences come into focus. Once men begin questioning modern dating expectations, their attention naturally turns toward marriage, not as an emotional ideal, but as a legal structure with very real consequences. In theory, marriage is sold as the ultimate expression of commitment, stability, and partnership. In practice, many men experience it as a contract where the risks are heavily asymmetric. They are asked to sign an agreement that can obligate them to surrender half their assets, commit to ongoing payments, and potentially lose daily access to their children and even their home, regardless of who caused the relationship to fail. What unsettles men most is not the idea of commitment itself, but the way the system responds when things go wrong. Divorce rates hovering around or above 50% are not abstract statistics when you are the one calculating what failure looks like. Courts rarely focus on fault in any meaningful way. Loyalty, effort, or sacrifice do not carry much legal weight. A man can be faithful, supportive, and present, yet still walk away financially dismantled if his wife decides to leave. The system is not designed to evaluate fairness in a moral sense, only to redistribute resources in a predictable direction. I have sat across from men who learned this lesson the hardest way possible. One client, after 15 years of marriage, discovered his wife was having an affair with her personal trainer. When the divorce was finalized, he lost the family home, paid substantial monthly support, and saw his children only a few weekends a month. The betrayal was painful, but what broke him psychologically was realizing that the system did not care who violated the marriage. His role was reduced to that of a financial provider, even after the relationship itself had been broken by someone else. Stories like this do not stay isolated. Men talk. They watch what happens to their fathers, their brothers, their friends. Over time, a pattern becomes clear. Marriage is less about shared responsibility and more about long-term liability. This is why many modern men are not rejecting commitment, but redefining it. They are willing to live together, to build a life, to be emotionally present, but they are increasingly unwilling to sign a government-backed contract that treats marriage like a wealth transfer mechanism. From their perspective, this is not cynicism. It is risk management. They see a system that rewards exit over repair and provides no meaningful protection for the person who contributes the most financially. Calling this fear or insecurity misses the point entirely. It is a rational response to repeated evidence. As legal marriage loses its appeal, men begin to ask deeper questions about value, self-respect, and what they are actually seeking from a relationship. For many, this leads to a surprising realization before sharing a life with someone else. They must first learn how to stand comfortably on their own. That realization opens the door to an often misunderstood but powerful phase of life, learning to be content in solitude rather than desperate for partnership. Learning to be comfortable alone is one of the most misunderstood turning points in a man's life. Society often frames solitude as failure, as if a man without a partner must be incomplete, socially defective, or emotionally closed off. In reality, the ability to be content in your own company is one of the strongest indicators of psychological health and self-respect. If someone needs constant validation, attention, or a relationship to feel whole, they are not seeking love, they are seeking regulation. At that point, a partner becomes a substitute therapist rather than an equal. Many men reach this stage after experiencing relational chaos. They realize that the quiet of being alone is not emptiness, but relief. There are no emotional landmines, no financial negotiations disguised as affection, no pressure to perform or prove worth daily. Solitude becomes a space where clarity returns. A man can think, build, train, rest, and plan without constantly managing someone else's expectations. This is not isolation driven by bitterness, but peace earned through experience. From a psychological perspective, this phase recalibrates boundaries. A man who is happy alone is no longer easily manipulated by fear of abandonment or shame-based language. He does not tolerate disrespect simply to avoid loneliness, because loneliness no longer terrifies him. This changes everything. Standards become internal instead of reactive. Choices are made from strength rather than scarcity. Ironically, this is also the point where men become more attractive, not because they are trying to be, but because they are no longer chasing approval. Their attention is no longer a free resource. It is selective, grounded, and calm. Yet, instead of this being recognized as maturity, it is often framed as emotional unavailability or avoidance, especially by those who benefited from his previous overgiving. The deeper truth is that solitude exposes intent. When a man is content alone, any relationship he enters must add genuine value rather than simply fill a void. Peace becomes the baseline, not something to be negotiated away. This is why many men say that being alone taught them more about relationships than years of dating ever did. They learn that connection is meaningful only when it is chosen, not when it is used as anesthesia for discomfort. Once men reach this level of independence, their tolerance for financial entitlement and one-sided expectations drops sharply. They begin to see dating dynamics more clearly, especially the growing belief that a man's role is to compensate for costs he did not create. That shift brings us directly into the modern debate around money, entitlement, and what dating has quietly turned into for many men. As men grow comfortable with independence, they start noticing patterns in dating that once felt normal, but now feel deeply distorted. One of the most common is the belief that a man is responsible for reimbursing a woman for the cost of preparing for a date: hair, nails, makeup, outfits, skincare. Even the emotional energy of showing up are increasingly framed as expenses he must compensate for. In some cases, men are sent digital payment requests before the first date even happens. Hundreds of dollars demanded as proof of seriousness before a single conversation has taken place. When men decline, the reaction is rarely introspective. Screenshots are posted online. Narratives are written casting the woman as a victim of male stinginess or oppression. Context disappears, and the assumption is that refusal equals disrespect. What is never addressed is the underlying logic. When did mutual interest turn into a pre-invoice transaction? Preparing for a date is a personal choice, not a service rendered to a stranger. Yet modern dating culture increasingly treats it as labor-owed compensation. This mentality transforms dating into a soft form of financial extraction. Many women openly admit they go on dates primarily for free meals, drinks, or experiences. Some maintain lists of men assigned to different days of the week based on who pays for what. The man is not evaluated as a person, but as a resource category. His personality, values, and character become secondary to the size of the bill he can absorb. This behavior is often celebrated online as empowerment, yet, stripped of rhetoric, it mirrors classic manipulation tactics. Psychologically, this creates a dangerous feedback loop. Men who recognize the pattern withdraw, while those who stay are often the ones most vulnerable to exploitation. Over time, trust erodes. A man begins every interaction with suspicion, wondering whether he is being seen or simply priced. Romance loses its spontaneity because every gesture feels like it carries an invoice. What makes this especially corrosive is that genuine generosity becomes indistinguishable from obligation. A man who enjoys providing, who finds meaning in treating a partner, begins to question his own instincts. Is he being kind? Or is he being farmed when generosity is demanded rather than appreciated? It stops being generosity at all. This shift in dating economics did not happen in a vacuum. It is heavily fueled by social media narratives that inflate expectations and redefine worth in purely financial terms. To understand how these beliefs spread so quickly and feel so justified to those who hold them, we need to look closely at the role of online platforms and the illusions they create. Social media has become the primary architect of modern dating expectations, quietly reshaping desire, standards, and self-perception at a scale no previous generation experienced. Short-form videos and curated posts repeatedly tell women they deserve a millionaire lifestyle, luxury travel, designer gifts, and a man who earns 6 or 7 figures as a baseline requirement. These messages are rarely paired with any discussion of contribution, compatibility, or shared responsibility. The emphasis is entirely on outcome, not exchange. When asked what they bring to a relationship beyond demands, the answers often collapse into slogans. "I am the table" has become a popular response, implying inherent value without reciprocal effort, psychologically. This framing removes the need for growth or self-examination. If worth is assumed rather than developed, then any mismatch between expectation and reality must be someone else's fault. This is how entitlement hardens into identity. One of the most damaging ideas circulating online is the distorted version of manifestation culture. The claim is that by visualizing wealth, writing affirmations, or creating vision boards filled with yachts and private jets, the universe will deliver a high-status man as a reward. This belief allows people to bypass the uncomfortable work of skill building, emotional maturity, and realistic self-assessment. A woman working part-time with no long-term plan is encouraged to reject stable, decent men because TikTok promises a billionaire soulmate if she just holds her standards. The result is not empowerment, but paralysis. Good men are dismissed as placeholders, lessons, or dusty distractions on the way to a fantasy that statistically does not exist. Meanwhile, the men who do have extreme wealth and options are not selecting partners based on viral checklists. They choose based on discretion, peace, loyalty, and alignment, qualities rarely emphasized in online dating discourse. This gap between expectation and reality creates chronic dissatisfaction, even when opportunities are present. From a psychological standpoint, social media rewards extremity. Calm, balanced perspectives do not go viral. Outrage, mockery, and inflated demands do. Over time, users internalize these extremes as normal, forgetting that algorithms amplify what provokes emotion, not what builds healthy relationships. Comparison becomes constant. A woman no longer compares her relationship to real couples she knows, but to filtered highlights of strangers who may not even be telling the truth. Men watching this unfold do not feel challenged to improve. They feel disqualified by default. When standards are framed as non-negotiable fantasies rather than preferences grounded in reality, men disengage before the conversation even begins. They are not afraid of high standards. They are unwilling to audition for an illusion. As these online narratives harden, they spill into real relationships, carrying with them a deeper issue that goes beyond money or status. At the core is a growing refusal to take responsibility when expectations fail, and an increasing reliance on materialism to substitute for accountability, connection, and self-awareness. That is where the damage becomes most visible. At this stage, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. A refusal to take responsibility now sits at the center of many modern relationship dynamics. When things fall apart, the explanation is never internal. It is never poor judgment, unrealistic standards, or destructive behavior. Instead, the blame is outsourced to men being intimidated, emotionally unavailable, or incapable of handling a strong woman. This narrative is comforting because it protects the ego, but it is also corrosive because it eliminates any incentive for self-correction. I have worked with men whose lives were publicly damaged by this refusal. One client watched his ex-wife post accusations online, claiming he was financially controlling simply because he suggested a budget. The posts spread quickly, painting him as abusive and selfish. What never made it into those viral narratives was the court record showing she had not worked in 5 years and was spending $8,000 a month on discretionary shopping. When the legal documents surfaced, the posts were quietly deleted, but the reputational damage was already done. In the court of public opinion, accountability rarely survives emotional storytelling. This mindset is reinforced by a growing culture of materialism that has replaced core relationship values. Compatibility, character, shared vision, and emotional stability have been pushed aside in favor of lifestyle optics. The question is no longer, do we build well together, but can you fund the version of life I want to display? Relationships become less about connection and more about curation. The man is evaluated by his ability to provide Instagram moments rather than emotional safety or mutual growth. Materialism also reframes effort in deeply asymmetrical ways. Emotional labor is monetized when it flows one direction, yet completely dismissed when it flows the other. Listening, supporting, providing, protecting, planning, and sacrificing are treated as basic expectations for men, while minimal contributions are framed as extraordinary. This imbalance creates resentment on both sides, though only one side is typically allowed to express it without being shamed. Psychologically, the constant externalization of blame stunts emotional development. If every failure is someone else's fault, there is no reason to reflect, adapt, or mature over time. This leads to repeated relational collapse followed by increasingly elaborate justifications. The story must become more dramatic each time to preserve the illusion of innocence. Men witnessing this pattern do not feel inspired to try harder. They feel warned. They learn that even good faith effort can be retroactively reframed as exploitation, control, or neglect. Faced with that risk, many choose distance over devotion. This environment sets the stage for more calculated behaviors to emerge, where dating is no longer about connection at all, but about optimization, leverage, and strategy. As responsibility fades, manipulation quietly takes its place, especially in a world dominated by dating apps and algorithm-driven attention. As responsibility erodes, dating increasingly becomes a strategic game rather than an emotional process. And nowhere is this more visible than in app-based culture. I have seen women openly describe keeping spreadsheets that rank men by income, profession, and spending capacity, rotating dates across the week to optimize financial return rather than emotional connection. This is framed as smart management, even likened to portfolio diversification, with the justification that men have always been strategic. What is conveniently ignored is that men historically did not demand women bankroll their entire lives while offering nothing but access and ambiguity in return. Dating apps intensify this distortion by inflating perceived value. An average-looking woman can receive hundreds of matches, which creates the illusion of rarity and high demand. Psychologically, this skews self-assessment. Attention becomes confused with commitment, and options are mistaken for leverage. Many women conclude they deserve celebrity-level treatment, not realizing that most of the attention comes from men who have no intention of long-term investment. The result is a painful mismatch. Men with options seek short-term pleasure, while women interpret that interest as confirmation of long-term worth. This illusion extends to wealth itself. The idea of the millionaire boyfriend is rarely grounded in how wealth actually works. Men with money often live conservatively, drive practical cars, and guard their time and resources carefully. They do not fund endless shopping sprees, luxury trips, or spontaneous upgrades for someone who has not earned deep trust when fantasy collides with reality. Disappointment is inevitable, and it is often blamed on men being deceptive rather than expectations being flawed. What makes this even more concerning is the rise of paid content explicitly teaching manipulation. There are courses and videos instructing women on how to finesse men into paying bills, covering rent, or financing lifestyles without any commitment or intimacy. Scripts are shared. Psychological tactics are broken down step by step. Thousands take notes, not to build relationships, but to extract benefits while maintaining plausible deniability. This behavior is celebrated as leveling the playing field, yet it fundamentally destroys the possibility of trust. Men are not oblivious to this shift. Many learn quickly, often after one or two expensive lessons. That transparency is risky and generosity can be weaponized. They adapt by disengaging emotionally, reducing investment, or exiting the dating market entirely. What begins as self-protection eventually becomes detachment. Dating apps, rather than connecting people, end up training both sides to expect the worst from each other. The tragedy is that beneath these strategies are people who still want connection, stability, and mutual respect. But when dating becomes a marketplace governed by algorithms and incentives that reward exploitation, sincerity becomes a liability. Men who want genuine partnership feel out of place, and women who want security are taught tactics that undermine the very outcome they claim to desire. As these dynamics accelerate, they no longer remain individual problems. They spill into broader cultural tensions between men and women, making honest dialogue nearly impossible and pushing more people into defensive camps. To understand where this ultimately leads, we need to zoom out and examine the larger social consequences of a dating culture built on leverage instead of cooperation. When these dynamics scale beyond individual experiences, they begin to reshape the social fabric itself. Conversations between men and women become increasingly fragile, not because the issues are unsolvable, but because they are no longer allowed to be discussed honestly. Any attempt at rational analysis is quickly reframed as hostility. Statistics are dismissed as biased, lived experiences are invalidated, and emotional escalation replaces dialogue. In this environment, disagreement is treated as an attack, and accountability is mistaken for cruelty. The contradiction at the heart of modern gender discourse becomes impossible to ignore. Many advocate for absolute economic equality, while simultaneously demanding partners who dramatically outperform them financially. Companies are pressured to prioritize diversity, yet the same voices complain that there are not enough high-earning men available to date. You cannot demand equal outcomes in the workplace and unequal outcomes in relationships without creating tension. The math does not work, and no amount of moral language can override basic reality. Faced with this contradiction, men are opting out at unprecedented rates, not in protest, but in quiet calculation. They choose gaming over going broke, peace over constant conflict, freedom over financial servitude, and contrary to popular narratives, many of these men appear calmer, healthier, and more fulfilled than they were when actively dating. They are not angry at women. They are simply unwilling to participate in systems that punish good faith and reward exploitation. In response, satire and humor have emerged as coping mechanisms. Videos mock the impossibility of meeting endless checklists that require a man to be in the top fraction of a percent of earners while having the free time of someone unemployed. Others highlight how physical filters eliminate nearly all men before personality even enters the conversation. Humor becomes a pressure valve, a way to say this is absurd without being accused of hatred. The phrase "I'm good" has become a quiet anthem, signaling clarity rather than defeat. What many women misunderstand is leverage. Attention in your 20s is not the same as commitment in your 30s. When attention fades, the question, "Where did all the good men go?" often surfaces. The answer is uncomfortable but simple. They went where they were treated like partners instead of wallets. They chose women who did not confuse standards with entitlement and peace with submission. The dating culture we are witnessing is not broken because people are flawed. It is broken because the agreements are incoherent. Loyalty, mutual support, and shared sacrifice have been replaced by extraction, performance, and endless testing. The old social contract has been torn apart, and no new one has been negotiated in its place. Until expectations are grounded in reality and responsibility is shared rather than outsourced, more people will conclude that the cost of participation outweighs the benefit. The loneliness many fear is not created by being alone, but by being in arrangements where one person gives and the other only takes. The real question now is not why men are leaving, but whether anyone is willing to rebuild a framework where partnership is once again worth choosing.